Sometimes seeking advice from people on the internet doesn't produce quite the right results. It's not necessarily that they're wrong or mean you any harm, but if the concept of misinterpretation applies anywhere, it surely applies in the world of digital communications. Give me a good old face-to-face chat any day. For example, one moto vlogger suggested that concerning oneself too much with tyre pressures when alternating between surfaced and unsurfaced roads was a waste of time. He did go on to concede that with the extreme demands of, say, trials riding, paying attention to pressures would likely prove essential, but that in general, neither motorcycle tyres nor motorcycle weights were large enough for tyre pressures to be overly significant. I was only too happy to hear this, since riding legally usable unsurfaced trails in England and Wales means a fair amount of time spent on the blacktop whilst navigating from one happy place to the next. The suggestion that there was no need to make constant stops to adjust tyre pressures was most welcome. Early forays with my 790 Adventure R away from paved roads saw me running KTM's recommended off-road pressure of 26 pounds per square inch, or 1.8 bar, front and rear. All seemed fine both on and off the blacktop, but eventually resulted in a pinch flat, which required an in-the-field repair. This proved somewhat challenging due to the field in question being plentiful in sheep, grass and molehills, but entirely bereft of motorcycle lifts, beer crates or paddock stands. Anyway, after that little drama, I upped the pressures a bit, arriving at a predictable compromise of 30 psi, that sitting neatly between KTM's off-road recommendation of 26 psi and their on-road recommendation of 35 or 2.4 bar. I motored on happily for some 6,000 miles at this pressure, on roughly 2/3 tarmac and 1/3 dirt, until, with the front knobbly beginning to wear down, a common bugbear suffered by trail riders the world over began to dominate the on-tarmac experience. I refer, ladies and gentlemen, to the dreaded front-end bounce. The elephant in the room here is not front-wheel balance, but the fact that your dirt tyres are clamped to your rims using a rim lock. This device, a sort of heavy metal shoe that clamps the tyre bead to the rim and is held in place by a nut torqued onto the rim lock's securing bolt passed through a hole in your wheel rim, causing uninitiated onlookers to wonder why you appear to have two valves, stops the tyre spinning on the rim, the effect of which could and almost certainly would tear out your inner tube's valve stem. Since the air we breathe should never find itself being diluted by the air that is intended to keep our beloved wheel rims cushioned from brutal terra firma, having one's valve stem ripped out is not ideal, or, in Formula 1 speak, is suboptimal. Anyway, this rim lock's weight causes a vertical oscillation which you will never notice on unsurfaced trails, but on paved roads results in the front bouncing up and down with every revolution of the wheel. It's annoying, it's unpleasant, it's probably not dangerous, but it sure as hell can piss you off. To an extent, the problem can be successfully damped using spoke weights mounted opposite the rim lock's position, but they increase unsprung weight, are considered by some to be unsightly, and whilst they might improve things to some degree, they can't make the problem disappear completely. Running mousses in place of tubes doesn't help, and is not an option if long periods of tarmac use are part of the plan. They'd simply overheat and disintegrate, and in any case they're not legal for use on UK public roads. So I contemplated possible solutions. Removal of the front rim lock seemed the most obvious course of action. My buddy Matt, an ex-motocrosser and two-stroke dirt pilot extraordinaire, advised that as long as I was running sufficient pressure and not doing anything too extreme, plus I kept an eye on the valve stem, checking regularly for any deviation from 90 degrees to the rim, indicating the aforementioned highly undesirable tyre creep, then life without the front rim lock ought to be okay. Not being totally sure I like the sound of ought to be as opposed to will be okay, I decided first to try running KTM's road pressure recommendation of 35 psi. Which brings us to the ride shown in this video, and a most surprising revelation. Firstly, the infuriating bouncing phenomena seemed reduced by a factor of approximately a lot. Please note I'm using the highly scientific measurement system here, and a lot is right up there with shedloads. This was most gratifying, but before I'd had time to think about it, we hit the day's first unsurfaced trail. On a fractionally sub-zero and thus icy winter morning in northern Britain, we were soon cracking through a farm track's frozen muddy puddles and crunching along across a thin crust of just about frozen topsoil, and things were suddenly feeling, well, suboptimal. Concentrating fully on trying to remain aboard ship, I completely forgot the tyre pressure adjustment I'd made, and in any case, what was 5 psi extra among friends? Surely a rank amateur such as myself wouldn't even feel the difference, even if it had seemed so much better on tarmac. Being me, I assumed it was just the familiar downward spiral of skill failure leading to ever-shrinking confidence, leading to ever-worsening skill failure, leading to... well, you get the picture. One of those days when the ride just ain't gonna come good. The next 2 tarmac sections were pleasing, with the bounce clearly reduced. But on the next 2 green lanes, although not at all challenging technically, I was really starting to think this might be a ride to abandon before I hurt myself. I just didn't feel happy riding in the crisp dirt and was 100% blaming myself. Eventually, we came to our favourite North Lakes trail, a long, for round these parts, fairly high route that begins with a reasonably steep climb, made interesting by the dry, cold conditions ensuring the rocks forming the trail surface were as loose as Putin's screw. During this ascent, which is so familiar to me I normally sail up it without a thought, the bike seemed to develop a nasty willfulness in my hands, steering just wherever it fancied, wheel spinning at all times, heading off the trail at one moment, almost pitching me off and over the bars at the next. I found myself shouting angrily to myself to get a grip and come on! Questioning myself out loud, why can't I ride today? What the hell's the matter with me? Now you may wonder why I didn't put 2 and 2 together and figure out what the problem was. I wonder these things too, and can only assume it's a combination of thick as pig shit, general self-loathing, and inherent confidence issues. At no time did I think to equate the almost constant wheel spin from the rear end, or the front wheel bouncing off every rock causing the bike to steer off in any direction it fancied, to the increase in tyre pressure. Only later, when I mentioned my struggles to riding companion and trials riding aficionado Mark that I was struggling so, did he point out that even minor changes to tyre pressure could have significant effects given the right conditions. Conditions like today's loose, dry rocks on this steep incline. I was completely gobsmacked. I mean, a small, subtle change in performance that a Neanderthal like me wouldn't even notice. Perhaps might have been expected, but this was the difference between easy going and virtually unrideable. As Mark put it, a change in tyre pressures could mean the difference between night and day, and on this day he was dead right. Now, anyone familiar with my riding knows I need all the help I can get, and even though the increased pressure had improved the bouncing front end problem on the blacktop road sections, on the loose I'd handicapped myself to a quite extraordinary degree. Nevertheless, I persevered with the experiment for the remaining couple of hours of our ride, finding the problem even worse when we got into some soft, muddy terrain. It just wasn't worth the improvements in road comfort, but at least I'd stopped blaming myself. As always, with any form of motorcycling, it's all a confidence trick. With a bit of confidence, a dangerous ride turns safe, a slow track day turns fast. A difficult technical dirt challenge becomes a joyful conquest. A tight, nervous rider becomes a relaxed, fluid one, and at last a bad day turns into a great one. So, play with those tyre pressures, my fine feathered friends, and find that sweet spot. And if I do get round to removing the front rim lock, I'll let you know in another video. So that's it for tyre pressure chatter for now, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and feel free to hit the like, subscribe and notification buttons, or alternatively don't, whatever. I'm not making any pennies from this anyway. And if you happen to be in any way engaged in making the world an unpleasant place to live at this time, please stop doing that. Bye.